first reported on 31st December 2019 in Wuhan, China. Coronavirus, or COVID-19 for short, hit the world's rich and poor like a colossus. The world's rich and poor take it in aggregate about half of the world's population. Since that time, at one time or another, were under lockdown from the pandemic. Many of the world's poor, most of whom work in the informal economic segment, have lost their incomes. The humongous losses have set a rethinking on how private sector and the commanding heights should continue to battle to save lives and livelihoods. Here in Nigeria, COVID, that is the Coalition Against COVID-19, a private sector initiative to try and give back. And lately, the anti-COVID vaccinations were prominent skirts against the rampaging COVID-19 missiles, now appearing, some will say, to be on the decline, or so it seems. Well, time will tell. Joining me on our Pride segment today at ICAN on Air to provide insights on the Nigerian post-COVID economic recovery, the place of the private sector, is a renowned economist, Dr. Muda Yusuf, the immediate past Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, LCCI. Our guest, Dr. Muda Yusuf, will be unveiled to you much more in details shortly. Also on this segment, we are going to be looking at a few news montage, of course, advert, and a bit of a social diary. I want you to please stay connected. We'll be back with you shortly. And thanks for hanging on. We now just throw to you a few news items that are making the rounds. The Debt Management Office raises 362.577 billion sukuk in 5 years. Now, this was between September 2017 and June 2021 to finance important road projects. Another round is expected towards the end of the year, also on road projects in the 6 geopolitical zones of the country. And we have it as an headline, like a recurring decimal, that insecurity and inflation heightening uncertainty and the poor FDI inflows. That appeared in the Guardian. Food inflation is rising by leaps and bounds, and insecurity, which has traversed the length and breadth of the country, is preventing the farmers from going to farm. And then what end do we have? To move towards the end of the year, these are indices we should continue to look out for. Well, the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission, the NIPC, said it tracked about 8.99 billion as investment announcement in its investment announcement in the third quarter of 2021, with Lagos State accounting for 81%, a whopping 81%, at 7.29 billion during that period. Oh, Lagos taking the lion's share as usual. And I like to say very quickly, in concluding the news montage, that the CBN Technical Partners BITS Incorporation's Chief Executive Officer, Brian Polka, has made some cheering announcement, and that is to the effect that phone applications for people without bank accounts will be rolling out soon. This is in alignment with the CBN's objective of increasing inclusion. I say that's great news and very cheerful news. And we are going to be back with you shortly. You are welcome back. The COVID-19 pandemic that has ravaged the world, as I said in my intro, will be the areas that our esteemed guest, Dr. Muda Yusuf, will be delving into. Let me welcome you, Dr. Muda Yusuf, to ICAN on Air. Nice to see you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Akinfatunke. It's a great pleasure and honor to be on this very prestigious platform. Thank you very much.
You are most welcome. And we just quickly delve into some of the areas we want you to give us insight. In 2020, just like 2019, the COVID-19 pandemic had devastating effects on economic activities. Can you kindly give us and our viewers especially an insight into its effects on the global economy and Nigerian economy in particular?
Well, as all of us know, the impact was very profound. There was impacts from the point of view of the macroeconomic environment, and this was transmitted largely through the collapse of commodity prices. It affected our foreign reserves. It affected the capacity to fund the foreign exchange market. It led to sharp depreciation in the currency, and this had a serious, significant pass-through effects across all sectors. As we speak, we have not yet recovered from that. And of course, we had issues impact on the global supply chains, which was heavily disrupted, which affected access to raw materials and all of that. And because of the response mechanisms by various governments, we had the locking down of some sectors, restrictions, and all of that. And eventually, this drove the economy into very serious recession. But the good thing is that at least we are gradually getting out of it. The situation now is not as bad as the situation this time last year. The economy is beginning to record some very impressive growth. We exited recession first quarter of 2020. We did slightly better in the first quarter of 2021. And in second quarter of 2022, we had a 5% GDP growth, which was unexpected. So things are getting better. I think we can now begin to feel a lot more comfortable, even though there are still quite a lot that we need to do, both at the macro level and also at the micro level.
In the language of economists, we do talk about worst case scenario. Yeah, we could agree positively that things can change. What if it turns the other way around? If this pandemic continues, say for the next 24 to 36 months, what will be the position of Nigeria given our precarious economic and health situations? Just in case.
Just in case, and God forbid, the impact will be very, very severe, because already the economy and the social environment is practically on edge because of the challenges of poverty, because of the ravaging issues around insecurity, high inflation, and all of that. So if we now have another round of very profound pandemic, it will be very, very serious, because it's as if the country is already at the precipice. But the probability that that will happen is extremely low. So at this point, I think we have to remain very positive that the worst is over.
We must continue to remain positive, absolutely, and work towards those positivism. Now, I'm going to throw you a bit under the bus right now, Dr. Yusuf. As the immediate past Director General of LCCI, you are the de facto arrowhead for the implementation of the body's planned initiatives when those unexpected pandemics struck. Tell me, how dazed were you?
Well, it was very devastating, because the Chamber of Commerce, as you know, is made up of business organizations, and the chamber can only be as healthy as its members. So to the extent that many members were devastated, that affected the chamber, just as it affected practically all professional bodies and business associations. Because to the extent that the professional bodies and business associations are made up of investors largely, whether in the service sector or in the real economy, once they run into this kind of turbulence, it also affects the organizations on which they operate.
Naturally.
So it was very, very devastating.
I can just imagine.
At a lot of is that, I mean, there was a lot of engagement, there was a lot of education, there was a lot of training, there was a lot of enlightenment as to what kind of response should come at the business level, which a lot of people took advantage of. We had this even with ICAN, the business associations, NECA, NASIMA, and quite a number of donor agencies also organized a bit of things. And the government also responded, through all sort of stimulus package and all of that. At least it had a partial effect in ensuring that the shock on investors wasn't too profound.
You was too profound. Thank you very much. And then still back to you when you were on seat. I wanted to know how shocked you would have been. I mean, carrying so many of the private manufacturing and service on your neck. Let me ask you, from business and health perspectives, will you say that the total lockdown was justifiable in retrospect?
Well, in retrospect, I'm not sure that we achieved much with the total lockdown. And you could see the kind of social backlash that resulted from it. Because we have an economy where close to 80% of the citizens, especially the working population, live on daily income. So when you had a total shutdown, I mean, many people could just not survive. By the time the lockdown was running to 2, 3, going to the 4th day, there was already a build-up of very serious social tension, which in some cases even exploded, leading to some almost an uncontrollable situation. Seeing all sorts of issues all around the country. I think with the benefit of hindsight, perhaps it could have been managed a lot better. And that is why if you see the way the government has been responding ever since, the issue of lockdown is almost seen now as a very last resort. Government too has been seriously reluctant because you have to worry about livelihood. It is important to worry about lives, but you also need to worry about livelihood of people. When you try to protect lives, you short the livelihood of people, you also create some other problems which could easily spin out of control. That was the lesson of that. So it was easier to continue to manage it the way the government has been doing, enlightening people, putting protocols in place, than resorting to total lockdown. The total lockdown could create a lot more problems that could go beyond what the government.
Definitely, as an economist, we talk about estimates at the end of the day. Is it possible for you to just give us the estimate losses that we got as a nation during that lockdown?
Well, some of these estimates can be difficult, but certainly you'll be talking of trillions of naira. Because this economy is worth 150 trillion.
Yeah.
And if we had that kind of shutdown for the number of days, the period, and all the losses that people suffered, we'll be talking about trillions, maybe 10 to 15 to 20 trillion that suffered as a result of that lockdown. Because the impact was not just for the days of the lockdown. The impact was even the aftermath, because after that lockdown, it took quite a lot of time for the economy itself to recover. On top of the general challenges, the macroeconomic challenges that the COVID itself had inflicted. So the losses were quite enormous. And
Okay.
I believe that the government, following from that experience, knew that it was better to balance livelihood and life in managing the COVID effect.
We are talking about the critical balance here, but at the last United Nations General Assembly, Nigeria was still on the positive side, was reportedly commended for the way it handled the COVID-19 pandemic through the NCDC, that is the Nigerian Center for Disease Control. Please, can you share with our viewers your assessments of the Nigerian government's response, which you said tried to balance anyway? And how will you assess the role played by the private sector in handling of that pandemic without that milieu?
Well, the role played by the private sector was very, very impressive. They came on board. They supported the government with financial resources. They supported in kind. And the intervention was really very, very profound. And I think we must commend those who are the key drivers of that initiative. The central bank was also at the forefront of that. We must commend that. It was a very, very commendable and laudable initiative. And we are talking about mobilizing resources that runs into billions, significant billions of naira at that time. So that I think was something commendable. In terms of the commendation of the country, within the limit of the resources that the NCDC had, I think they did very well. They were very professional, particularly the leadership of that organization. But we must also thank God, because given our population, given the limitations we have with our health care system and healthcare infrastructure, if God has not been on our side, the situation could have been much, much worse than what it was. So while thanking them, we also give thanks to God that we are able to.
Yes, I was just going to say that I will just we give thanks to the Almighty, and I know the COVID, the private sector, were given some physical incentives to entities that supported the COVID initiative. Now let's take a leap a bit backward and look at the national economy. Okay, still within the pandemic lockdown, open up. Some people say they believe, some people say they don't believe, that, the national economy was going to have exited its COVID-19 pandemic in this recession, which you already mentioned in the last quarter of 2020. While the growth in GDP has been sustained in the first and second quarters of 2021. What specific incentives account for this early exit of Nigeria from the recession?
Well, first of all, the government put in place what we call the Economic Sustainability Plan.
Correct.
The plan was valued at about 2.3 trillion naira.
Right.
The CBN also did quite a lot in terms of injecting liquidity into the economy.
Right.
All of those things, I think, helped. But more importantly, was the relaxation of all the controls, all the restrictions within the economy. Right. Those relaxation allowed people to come back to their businesses. At the moment people were able to come back, then the economy began to pick up. So it's a combination of factors. There is the environmental factor, which is the fact that a lot of activities now resumed. The tempo of economic activities increased. That created a lot more income, a lot more activities, a lot more jobs. That played a major relaxation of the restrictions. Then, of course, the fiscal stimulus, the monetary stimulus, also
which you already mentioned. Yeah. Okay, will you say, therefore, will I be blowing my trumpet as a Nigerian to say that were there lessons other countries learned from the Nigerian experience?
Yeah, of course, there are lessons. We just commended the private sector. I mean, what they did. Not many countries had that kind of positive experience of getting their private sector to give that kind of support. That was a major lesson. And the way that the NCDC also managed the situation within the limit of resources also provided something for other countries to learn from. I mean, that is the reason why even our NCDC chairman got a new appointment at the World Health Organization. It's an acknowledgement of what was done at that time. Of course, within the limit of the resources available to them.
The kind of pioneering role that the Lagos State government did, the Commissioner for Health at that time was very much on top of it, that people kept on asking, wow, is this same Nigeria? Now, I want to also now get back to you on something. I know the private sector did quite a lot. Is this therefore ticking that box and says the private sector role in what they did during the lockdown is such that the commanding heights should substantially be handed to the private sector to manage rather than the controls and the regulations that we have?
Well, the Nigerian private sector is a very vibrant organ of this economy. The private sector accounts for over 80% of the GDP. GDP is the total output, economic
Those
output
measure,
in the country.
correct?
And we have seen the role that the private sector has been playing in terms of job creation, in terms of revenue generation, in terms of even ensuring social stability, in terms of supporting the government in quite a number of ways. And we have seen that even sectors that before now were dominated by government have been practically taken over by the private sector. And they are doing amazing things. Look at the transformation that has taken place in our ICT sector, in our entertainment industry, in our even aviation sector. There was a time it was only Nigerian Airways. There was a time it was only NTA that we had. Look at the number of radio stations. Look at the number of private hospitals, private educational institutions. So much more that the private sector is doing, and the private sector could do a lot more if we enlarge the scope for the private sector to do more. And that is the way to actually get this economy to move faster in terms of growth, in terms of development, in terms of diversification. The more space we give the private sector, the better for the economy. Look at the sector that the public sector is sitting on, the refineries. Look at what has happened to refineries. Look at the consequence of that on the macro economy. Look at the amount we are using to import petroleum products. Look at all the scandal around subsidy and all of that. It's because the private sector is not firmly in charge of that space. So that is why we are saying that the more that we expand the scope of the private sector, the better for the economy. And in economic management, that's what we call market failure. If there are areas where we feel the private sector cannot deliver, we can easily identify that. But the private sector can do a lot more to support this economy if given the opportunity.
Of course, in terms of public-private initiatives, well, we have had the government saying that the nation has to spend its way out of recession even with a deficit financing model. How wise was the adoption of this model?
Well, it is what we call the Keynesian model in economics. That is when you activate expenditure to accelerate economic recovery. It is something that is recognized in economics. But what is important first is the quality of the spending. Second, is also the quality of the debt that we incur. Because if you go and incur debts that are very expensive, that can be a burden on the government and on future generation. If you take the debt and you spend it on things that cannot support the capacity of the economy to grow, that can also be a problem for the economy. So it depends on first on what we use the debt for, one. Secondly, on what are the terms of the debts. For instance, the commercial debts are very expensive. They are very expensive to collect. And that is why, as we speak, we are struggling now with huge debt service burden. No matter what we say, the debt profile is already getting to a level that is not sustainable when you relate the debt service to revenue. So these are the challenges. We need to look at all these things critically, and these are things that are clearly spelled out in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. As much as possible, let us adhere to what is provided in that act.
Super point, Dr. Yusuf. I'll put this twin question. How do you think the nation can, one, attract FDI, foreign direct investments, and as someone who has seen it all, vis-a-vis the ease of doing business in Nigeria, how will you assess that within our quest to want to continue to attract FDI?
Well, it's a function of the environment that we create. It is the environment that will determine the kind of investment that we get. That is it. And let me say this. Foreign investment is as important as domestic investment. Or let me put it the other way around. Domestic investment is as important as foreign investment. Because I've seen this talk around, even in government, each time they are talking about investment, the first thing they are talking about is foreign investment. Whereas what is keeping this economy going today are the domestic investors. And more foreign investors will come here when they see that the domestic investors are thriving. So it is important to give as much focus to domestic investment as we give to foreign investment. And all of this is a function of the economic and investment environment that we create. It's a function of the economic environment. It's a function of the regulatory environment. It's a function of the structural environment. It's a function of the institutional environment. These are the things that can inspire confidence, because investment is about confidence.
Correct.
Create an investment that can inspire confidence in investors, whether they are domestic, whether they are foreign. I think that is what is important. And you can only determine what you need to do through proper engagement with stakeholders in the economy.
Wow, super. And when stakeholders, and let's perhaps look at the banks. How will you assess the role of Nigerian banks and other financial institutions, especially as relates to they are providing investable funds to private sector players? Just briefly.
Well, for the banks can only give what they have. You cannot give what you don't have. One of the challenges we have in the financial system or banking system, first, is the cost of fund.
Yes.
They tell the bankers, they will tell you that they don't create the funds. They also generate funds at a cost. And they also have to grapple with some of these regulatory requirements.
Correct.
You have the CRR, cash reserve requirement, which is about 27.5%. You have liquidity ratio, which is 30%. Then you have all sorts of mandatory deposits and so on. All of these things also constrain the liquidity within the banking system. And it affects the cost of credit. And of course, you have to also pay depositors for the deposit that they have kept in the bank. So this will affect. The second challenge that we have with the banking system credit is the tenure of the fund. The bulk of the funds we have in the financial system are short tenured funds. Almost 90% of the funds are less than 2 or 3 years tenure. And if you want to invest in long-term projects in the real sector, you want to finance infrastructure, there's no way you can do that with that kind of stock of funds available in the financial system. So that is one fundamental thing that we also need to deal with if you want the banking system to actually support the real economy, to support infrastructure financing.
Super. Thank you. I even want to go back and talk about energy. Dr. Akinwumi Adeshino, the African Development Bank Samurai, made a statement. It says, no, today, no business can survive in Nigeria without a generator. How serious is the impact of lack of power and energy in private sector growth in Nigeria? Your perspective.
It's a very serious question. Because we have been talking about inflation. We've been talking about cost of production. We have been talking about the capacity of Nigeria to plug into the global value chain. We have been talking about regional competitiveness. We have been talking about global competitiveness. All of these things are a major function of the cost of production. And there's no way you can industrialize in any country if we don't have the energy to support industrialization. And industrialization is at the base of production. So that is why you see the economy is flooded by all manner of imported items. It's because of the cost of operation, particularly energy cost. As we speak now, diesel is almost over 300 naira per liter. Because diesel is already fully deregulated.
Correct.
The refineries have collapsed. As crude oil prices goes up, the cost of diesel is going up. A lot of industry depend on this, especially the SMEs. But not only for generators, but even for the trucks. All these trucks that you see moving goods around, they are running on diesel.
Correct.
So these things have very serious inflationary effect. So power is very key, to actually, especially now that we are talking about African Continental Free Trade Agreement. How are you going to compete if you are grappling with the challenge of energy at this level? If you are not careful, the economy just be turned into a market destination rather than an investment destination. That is the risk that we face. So we need to go back to the drawing board and see what you can do very quickly about this power situation. I know it has been a lot is being said about private sector driven process, but there has to be a balance. The government needs to support infrastructure development. That is what is happening in China and many other Asian countries. Government is playing a major role in the provision of infrastructure.
There is absolutely no gainsaying that. So, the private sector still needs to be given some feeling to be able to do more. It's like investing something and then you are harvesting, in multiple returns. Now, let me ask you, what processes or systems, in your opinion, do you think the private sector needs to put in place? Say who wants to come to equity must come in clean hands to ensure that the economy remains resilient in the event of another shock?
Now, there are two sides to this question. Just give me about 2 minutes. There is the economic side, which is the macro side. And sometimes when you are dealing with macro variables, you have very little control over the macro variables. You have said what is happening to inflation, to exchange rates, to the infrastructure, and so on. This is a platform of accountants. What we should be looking at is how the accountants can also advise the organizations on the right kind of business strategy to build business continuity and to build business resilience in a situation like this. And one of a few things that the accountants also need to be putting on the table by virtue of the advantage position in organization is to ensure the preservation of cash. When you are in a crisis, cash is king. We have to ensure that we preserve cash. We need to ensure that managements are flexible. We need to review all non-revenue generating activities in our organizations. Not all activities are revenue generating. In a time like this, there has to be a proper audit. We need to review the supply chain of our organizations. What is the supply chain? How can we make it cheaper? What kind of engagement can we have with suppliers? We need to promote innovation and creativity. We need to do a lot more with technology. This is the time we need to do a lot more with technology in order to cut down costs. We need to promote remote working. Remote working, from the experience that we have seen, has also reduced costs for many organizations. And we need to be abreast of the macroeconomic environment.
Super.
We need to understand the macroeconomic context. So because of the advantage position of accountants, they should be putting issues like this on the table to ensure business resilience, to ensure business continuity. And they need to strengthen the risk management framework, identify all these issues and to what extent they are impacting our various organizations. The variables impact organizations variously. We need to see which variables are impacting our organizations and to what extent the probability that these things will crystallize, the impact, and how we can manage those risks. Accountants have a big role to play. in this area?
You can say that again, not just a big role, but roles that we have offered ourselves to play for government. Hopefully, more and more will be listening and getting the fact that we need to put square pegs in round holes. The Institute of Chartered Accountants is more than ready with the human capital that we need in that direction. And we were just talking about supply chains. Let me refer to the CEO of UAC of Nigeria, Folakwe Ayesimoju. She was on record in stating that COVID impacted supply chains. We have said that. How have local businesses responded to the collapse of the international supply chains that came about as a result of COVID-19? One, and have they stepped in to fill the gap? How much gap is still outstanding, and what can we do to be truly self-sufficient in that value chain?
Well, luckily, the situation with the global supply chain has eased, at least between then and now. We have seen some restoration of supply chains globally. But more importantly was the lessons from that COVID experience. And the lesson from that is for us to also look a lot more inward, to look more in the direction of what we call import substitution, because for survival, it has become a major strategy for survival, import substitution. Not only because of COVID, also because of the sharp depreciation in the exchange rate. Because the cost of imports has gone up significantly, and it's also in a way affecting the supply chain because a lot of companies can no longer import raw materials the way they normally import. Not only because of COVID, but because of the depreciation in the exchange rate, because of the liquidity problem in the foreign exchange market. So that has imposed on all managers, including accountants, the challenge of innovation, the challenge of creativity, the challenge of import substitution to see how we can minimize dependence on imports and how we can substitute local products. I think these are the things, and quite a number of companies have been able to do that. They have been able to look inwards and patronize a lot more of what is produced locally to substitute their import. They have been able to develop domestic supply chains to replace their imports. I think that is the way to go, and the government also needs to support this initiative. I'm aware that the central bank is doing a lot from the monetary side, but we need to see a lot more from the fiscal side, from the infrastructure side, from the regulatory side, and from the taxation side to support all these initiatives.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yusuf. Let's talk fintech now. Specifically, what role can fintech play in the fight for economic recovery? What comparative advantage have we been able to show, even within the sub-Saharan economies? So, what role can fintech play?
You see, if there is any sector that has witnessed significant transformation, even in the heat of COVID, is the ICT sector. Even in the peak of COVID, the IT sector was posting very impressive growth. And if there's any silver lining from the COVID experience, is the leveraging of technology, particularly ICT. Fintech is a major component of ICT, and a lot of transformation is taking place. And the good thing about it is that it's driven by young people, and they are doing amazing things, attracting amazing investments. They are doing a whole lot, and I only wish that the government can give them a lot more support and also relax a bit of the regulatory environment so that they can unleash the huge potentials that these young people have. A lot is happening now. What we are seeing now, we are in a phase now where some of these fintech activities is almost chasing away the ATM machines. Many ATM machines are becoming redundant now because a lot of these fintech activities are taking place all over the place. and they are closer to small businesses by virtue of their size of operation. And it is in the SME space that a lot can also be done, a lot of potentials, a lot of value we need to unlock in the SME space. And the fintech are interfacing a lot more in that space. And it's driven by the energy of young people. So they are doing amazing things. And I believe that a lot more can be done if they get the right kind of support from the regulatory environment, because they seem to be moving faster than the regulators. So the regulator also need to step up to appreciate what these young people are doing.
Fantastic point, Dr. Yusuf. Now let me throw this. Assuming Mr. President invites you to the Federal Executive Council, a meeting, and says to you, Dr. Muda Yusuf, and give you 2 minutes, which is about, maximum of 120 seconds to address its members on Nigerian post-COVID economic recovery and the place of the private sector. What will you tell them?
What I will tell them is that those will ensure that first, they listen to economic experts. We have a very sound economic team that the president has put in place, but there is no evidence that the recommendations of this economic team are being acted upon. So we should listen to experts, we should engage technocrats, and we should improve generally on the political economy. The biggest challenge that this economy has is in the area of political economy, getting the right people to be in the right places. I think that is what we need, because we have the capacity, we have the brains, we have the intellectuals to make things happen. Let's just ensure that we put the right people, round pegs in round holes. If we do that, I think we'll see a lot of changes in this economy.
Takes an allusion back to the point I raised when you were pointing about what accountants, chartered accountants should be doing into entrepreneurship, into technology, into catching people young. And it's meet and proper that the powers that be will have the courage to put a lot of these square pegs in those square holes so that we can all continue to get into our El Dorado. Dr. Muda Yusuf, I'd like to thank you very much for coming on and sharing your perspective in broad areas from COVID, post-COVID, what the economy is supposed to be doing, looking at private sector, and ensuring that at all times we put our right leg forward. Could I have your last word as we round up this interview segment?
Well, this economy has a lot of potential. It's a very big economy. The opportunities are immense. It remains the biggest economy in Africa. But what we need to do between the private sector and the public sector is to ensure that we create the right kind of macroeconomic environment. We fix our foreign exchange environment in particular, that is very critical. We fix our regulatory environment. We fix our institutional environment so that we can unlock a lot more value in this economy.
Thank you very much, and I cannot thank you well enough, Dr. Yusuf. And for sure, we are going to be calling you more often to throw more insights into various aspects of economy and social, political life. Thank you so much. And I'd like to also thank online participants. Thank you very much for your comments, which you have shared very effusively with us. We will now take a break. And when we come back, we will just do a roundup for you to get a bit into our social diary and a few adverts. Please stay put. We'll be back.
necessary to drive economic growth and in support of the public interest.
Thank you very much for staying on. And if you have enjoyed this segment, we'd like to say that ICAN on Air is going to be back next Tuesday, November 9, 2021, at exactly 6 p.m. West African time. We are going to be looking at the subject, technology and public financial management reforms, the journey so far. And guesting will be Salawu Adeku Zubair Esquire, FCAMNI, a public servant, an author of the book, Treasury Single Account Policy in Nigeria. Let me leave you with this quote. In life and in death matters, such as COVID-19 pandemic, a focus on financial matters can seem misplaced. But for the world's poor, the financial impacts of COVID-19 can be devastating for more immediate situations, can be more financially devastating for the poor of the poor. That will be my parting shot this evening. And so, be the change you would like to continue to see. I am Akin Fatunke, your uncle. ICAN on Air. Bye for now.